Hello, everyone. Our next featured reader is going to be Danielle Truppi. She's amazing. She was born in the Inland Empire. She moved to the Bay Area to study art at UC Berkeley, where she carved and welded miniature furniture. She's now pursuing an MFA in fiction at San Francisco State University. Danielle is a co-editor-in-chief at 14 Hills and has written for Write Club SF, Oatmeal Magazine, and Zyzzyva's Obsession blog series. Welcome, Danielle Truppi.
Thank you, Presley.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, so I have the story for you, and then if there's time, a little bite-sized piece is this. This is, no it is not. No it is. This is Sunday. The sun was out, so there was the threat of swimming pools and frisbee games, activities that demanded the kind of moving that required strategy and elegance, the kind of moving some were better at than others. Kelly preferred the sun as what made the saints in the stained glass windows glow like candy. Across from their pew this week, the man with the curled staff stood with an apologetic look on his milk face. Kelly's favorite was the man holding the bird, but they didn't get there early enough to sit next to him. She loved kneeling on the padded bar between her mother and sister in silence, the gentle rattle of the air conditioning blending into the buzz of heat in her head. They stood for communion and proceeded down the aisle. Kelly prepared her arms in supplication across her chest to excuse her for her youth. She wouldn't be able to hold out her hands until next year, one on top of the other in graceful reception. After Mass, the congregation funneled out into the parking lot, murmuring catch-up questions and compliments. Shuffling towards her mother's car, Kelly crossed her arms and ceded the front seat to her older sister. Every Sunday when they got home from church, Kelly and her sister went into the backyard to behave as children were supposed to, expelling energy and collecting grass stains, neglecting dangers and inventing them. This Sunday, her sister had left to go to her friend's house for dinner. Kelly was on her own, but she decided to go outside anyway. She thought forcing proximity to that which brought her discomfort would eventually grant her access to the ease that others knew. Kelly used her sneakers to deepen the trench underneath the swing, pushed the dirt forward until the mounds broke onto her laces. The sky was gray, but the heat lingered and kept her attached to the rubber seat. Behind her was a dense wall of cypress. To her right, the fence that separated her backyard from Ethan's. As Kelly began to think about how far away dinner was, Ethan's fingers appeared, and then the rest of him. "Where's your sister?" Kelly had never spoken to Ethan before, had never uttered words meant to be heard by him exclusively. They had been neighbors for as long as Kelly could remember, and he appeared in her backyard every Sunday, but her sister was always there to direct and interpret, to account for and arrange the manner and degree of Kelly's participation during his visits. Ethan was 2 years older than she was. His arms hid bundles of sticks beneath sunny skin. Kelly struggled to best phrase her response and grew frantic as she tried to decide how much information to share. Her throat was obstinate from inactivity, mouth open, pressure building between her teeth. "She's at Jennifer's, her friend Jennifer's house." Kelly looked down at her sneakers, spent in slack. Ethan crossed the yard to sit in the swing next to Kelly. Hooking his thumbs onto the chains, he scooped the air with his legs, cutting through the pudding heat. His elbows wore the tender pink skin revealed by prematurely removed scabs. Swing set straining, Ethan pushed himself up and off the rubber seat and fell neatly on his feet, crouched to balance, and hopped to standing. He looked over his shoulder at Kelly, who returned her eyes to the dirt pile at her feet. "Your turn." Kelly was quiet. She smiled with doubtful eyebrows and sat still, her body pulling tight against its central spiral gnashing. Ethan turned and surveyed the yard, although Kelly was sure he knew it as well as his own. Slumped against the tool shed in the far corner, there was a children's plastic picnic table in rain-washed primaries with attached benches. The table shared this space with other bits of blanched plastic and a few wayward figurines. Ethan crossed the yard determinedly towards the shed. Disrupting spiders, he grabbed the table and dragged it underneath the swing he had vacated. Ethan forced one end to bite firmly into the ridge of the dirt and lifted the swing up and underneath the lip of the table on the opposite side. With the angle now at a threatening diagonal, Ethan ran up one bench, climbed across, and then slid down the other. Satisfied, he gestured towards Kelly. Your turn. Kelly felt leaden and breathless. When her sister was there, they would kick a ball around or throw seed pods into the gaps of the cypress sprays. Ethan never told her sister what to do, at least not with such impatience. He continued to gesture, so she approached the bench and tested the traction of her sneakers against the dirty plastic. Wedging fingertips underneath the bench, she heard the static snap of cobwebs as she attempted to force her body to the top. She slipped back to sanding and straightened with a furrowed brow. Mindy down the street can do this without even trying. Kelly tried again. Her fingers burned purple as the sky grew gray. Ethan pretended he had a whistle like a coach and laughed as she slid back down again. He walked around the yard gathering seed pods, which he released from the top of the angled bench, the seed pods bouncing past her and into the dirt or gathered in her hair. She grew angry then. A stretch, a heat, a prickling. She wanted Ethan to keep talking to her, to keep looking at her, but he made her feel like a toy. She clutched the sides of the bench and felt it soften in her hands, run down in colored streams like melted crayons. Come on. She felt his persistence beginning to fade and his attention shift towards his own restless body. She let go of the bench when her mother appeared at the screen door to beckon her inside for dinner. Her mother lifted an eyebrow towards the precarious picnic table. Kelly pointed at Ethan, and he lifted himself back over the fence. Kelly's mother smiled in the direction of his disappearance and then disappeared inside. The warmth of the kitchen deboned Kelly's fingers as she fumbled with silverware, arranged the glasses in the right corner of the placemats, napkins on the left. She fetched tongs for the salad and butter for the bread. On the TV, a well-dressed woman talked about people dying in a soft voice. Always people dying, and sometimes funny things animals did. They all sat down, bowed, and lifted their heads with a quick amen. Kelly's mother poured wine into glasses, one for herself and one for Kelly's father. Kelly grabbed a slice of hot bread from the basket, and her mother told her to be careful. Her parents retired to the couch with slivers of dessert as Kelly quietly slipped out the door to the backyard. The table was still resting in its hollow, cradled by the swing. On the bench there were slick cavities where her hands had been. She positioned herself in front of the bench and, with a running start, her foot maintained contact with the bench long enough to move the other one above it. Throwing up her hands, she grabbed an edge and pulled herself up, knees rubbing against the bench until she was perched on top. She released the table from the swing's hold, which let Kelly and the table both fall to the ground with a painful thump. She climbed up and laid her back against the tabletop. She thought about the silence of the night and how it was different from the silence of the morning at church. During the day, the silence was a surprise, an unnatural aberration of stillness. But then that stops, and it breaks down again. A pushing, a cracking, and erupting. At night, it was the foundation. The noise was what caused chaos, what shook everyone to attention. The table began to soften again underneath her. The rain-warped plastic liquidated gradually until Kelly found herself laying in a colorful pool. She stood and felt the colors run down her back, watched them dribble down her legs. Kneeling, she submerged her hands and lifted them out. Shimmering threads formed between her fingers and continued to grow as she returned to her feet. Kelly looped threads around her arm and caught the bundle against her palm until the pool was gone and she held a great spool of shimmering plastic. She snuck back into the house with the spool under her arm and made her way to her bedroom. Where the walls met at the corner of her bed, she began to unwind the spool. The strings of plastic from the picnic table, still fluid and tacky. Beginning at her feet, she crossed them back and forth across her body, up and over her head. She slipped her arms inside and folded them across her chest. To the faintest sound of the television, Kelly closed her eyes, triumph ringing in her bones. When her sister got home, she would have to get down, have to go to bed. Maybe she wouldn't notice. She'd think Kelly was already asleep. Maybe she wouldn't notice. I'm gonna read a silly one to end with some fun. It's got baseball in it. These are all my sweaty stories, which I thought was appropriate for today. And this one has baseball in it, and I've been advised that it should have more baseball in it. So I'm going to work on that. There was a snap across my knuckles, and I let go of the bat. I didn't know he was where it landed until we heard a wail that brought parents running. They stooped to interrogate their heaving prince. They cupped his face in their palms, sopping up his tears with sweeping thumbs. Honey, honey, honey. Outfield ran in to investigate. Pitcher took a seat, grabbed handfuls of dirt, and poured small mounds on top of his kneecaps. I shook my fingers to push the sting out and bit my slippery root-beard litter lips. Parents examined an egg now growing on the boy's shin. They turned to look at me, eyes wide and resolute. What have you done? The lump grew wider and darker, rounder and rounder. It became so round, the growth pinched at its base and fell onto the ground, a sphere of blue blood flesh landing in the dirt with a quick, shallow tremor. The injury, now dissociated, afflicted the boy no longer. He dusted himself off and wiped the dribble from his nose across the length of a thin forearm. Be careful. Parents slunk away, returning to their sweaty wine glasses and slick, sliced cheeses on the patio table. The game was about to resume, but our baseball had gone missing. We all put our noses to the ground and circled the yard. Left field found it and cried out, "Guys, guys, guys!" We gathered around what was left, a small milky puddle in which swam a knot of thick red thread. As we mourned the premature dissolution of our game, the boy picked up his bruised ball from off the dirt and hurled it at the garden wall. It returned with a bright bounce and landed at his feet. The afternoon was recovered, and the spirited round of handball that followed was rewarded with a trough of shimmering ice-cold lemonade. Thank you.